The billionaire's barren legacy. He threw her out with nothing but the clothes on her back, convinced she was the anchor dragging him down. Bryce Turner had it all. The billions, the tech empire, and the fiery young mistress on his arm. He thought the past was buried. But tonight, amidst the clinking of crystal in New York's most exclusive restaurant, the past didn't just walk in. It arrived in a convoy of absolute power. When Bryce looked up and saw his pregnant ex-wife, radiant and unbewatchable, holding the hand of the only man he feared in the business world, his heart didn't just stop. It shattered. This isn't just a story about heartbreak. It's a story about the kind of revenge that doesn't need to raise its voice to destroy you. Chapter 1. The Wedding Day. Hacienda Los Jazmines, Mexico. The grand hall of Hacienda Los Jazmines glowed under the radiance of crystal chandeliers. Every detail had been meticulously arranged for what was billed as the wedding of the year. Alejandro Velasco, the 38-year-old CEO of tech giant Velasco Tech Solutions and one of Mexico's richest men, adjusted his Italian silk tie, his gaze sweeping over the final preparations. He had everything a man could wish for: a multi-billion-dollar fortune, an unblemished reputation. And in a few hours, he would marry Celeste Valdez, the elegant heiress of a prominent Madrid family. However, an unshakable anxiety gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't shake no matter how much he tried to project an air of calm. "Mr. Velasco, the first guests are starting to arrive," announced his personal assistant discreetly. Felipe, a 50-year-old man who had been with him for over a decade. Alejandro nodded, his gray eyes scanning the guest list one last time. 350 carefully selected people, ministers, ambassadors, captains of industry, and a multitude of celebrities. Everyone had come to celebrate his union, but there was only one name on that list that truly mattered to him. And it was the presence of that person that filled him with the greatest dread. Emilia Dominguez. His first love, his first passion. The woman with whom he had shared 5 intense years before a tragic misunderstanding separated them forever. It had been 8 years since he last saw her. 8 long years during which he built his empire while trying to forget the scent of her chestnut hair and the sound of her crystalline laughter. Why on earth had he had the insane idea of inviting her to his wedding? Perhaps to prove to himself that he was completely over her? Or maybe out of pure masochism? He wasn't sure anymore. The hours passed slowly, marked by effusive congratulations from guests and the social smiles Alejandro dispensed with ease. Celeste was radiant in a custom-made wedding dress. Her blonde hair was perfectly gathered in an intricate chignon, her family jewels sparkling in the lights. She was the epitome of elegance, the exact type of woman a man of his stature should marry. Still, Alejandro couldn't help but cast furtive glances toward the entrance, looking for a silhouette he would recognize among thousands. "You seem distracted, darling," Celeste whispered, her arm sliding through his. Her perfect smile didn't waver, but he heard a hint of concern in her voice. "Is everything okay?" Alejandro forced a smile, gently caressing her powdered cheek. "Everything is perfectly fine, my love. Just the emotion of the moment." But deep down, he knew he was lying. Nothing was fine, and the suffocating feeling in his chest intensified with each passing minute. The civil ceremony in the Hacienda Gardens proceeded without a hitch under a clear April sky. A close family friend and politician gave an emotional speech about love and commitment. Alejandro responded, "I do," with a firm voice. But his eyes continued to scan the crowd discreetly. Emilia still wasn't there. Maybe she had decided not to come after all, which was probably for the best. And yet, a part of him couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. Applause erupted, as the official declared them husband and wife, and Alejandro kissed Celeste with all the tenderness he could muster. Photographers captured the moment that would undoubtedly be dubbed the kiss of the year by gossip magazines. But his mind was elsewhere, obsessed with a single question. Is this how a man is supposed to feel on his wedding day? This feeling of emptiness, as if he were an actor in a play whose script he didn't control? The cocktail reception had been in full swing for about an hour when Felipe approached Alejandro with his usual air of concern. "Sir, we have a delicate situation at the entrance. A Miss Dominguez has just arrived." But he hesitated, which was unusual for the normally direct man. "But what, Felipe? She hasn't come alone, sir. She is accompanied by a little girl who appears to be around 7 years old." Alejandro felt his blood run cold. 7 years. Exactly the age a child would be if conceived on their last night together. That night of passion and tears that preceded their final breakup. "Let them in," he said, his voice tighter than intended. "And Felipe, not a word of this to anyone for now." His assistant nodded and walked away quickly, leaving Alejandro alone with his thoughts, which were galloping like runaway horses. A 7-year-old girl. It had to be a coincidence, right? Emilia would have told him if she had a daughter. No, she had never spoken to him again after that fateful night. He had tried to contact her for months, but she had changed her number, moved, and disappeared from his life as if she had never existed. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Alejandro continued smiling and shaking hands, but his mind was elsewhere, fixed on this revelation that threatened to shatter his world. Celeste, fortunately, was busy with friends fawning over her dress and jewels, giving him a moment to compose himself. He drank his champagne, trying to look relaxed, but his hands trembled slightly, and he had the unsettling feeling that every guest could read his thoughts on his face. It was then that he saw her. Emilia appeared on this terrace, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, her chestnut hair falling freely over her shoulders, her simple but elegant dress highlighting her graceful silhouette. But what really took his breath away was the little girl holding her hand. A girl with light brown hair and gray eyes, so astonishingly similar to his own that he couldn't deny the truth hitting him like a hammer. The girl was his spitting image at that age. The same fine features, the same intense gaze, the same way of tilting her head slightly when something intrigued her. Alejandro felt his legs weaken and had to lean discreetly against a column to stay upright. How was it possible? How could Emilia have hidden their daughter's existence from him for all these years? Emilia's gaze swept the crowd until her eyes met his. And in that instant, which felt like an eternity, 8 years of silence and unspoken words hung between them like a heavy shroud. She was pale, visibly as shocked as he was, but there was a determination in her eyes he didn't recognize. The girl, meanwhile, looked around with curiosity, impressed by the opulence of the hacienda and the elegance of the guests. "Mommy, is this where my daddy is really getting married?" the girl asked in a clear voice that reached Alejandro's ears despite the background noise. Emilia leaned down and whispered something to her, but Alejandro had heard what he needed to hear. "Daddy." The girl was talking about him as her father, which meant Emilia had told her the truth about her origins. But then, why had she come today? What did she want after all these years of silence? He needed to go talk to her, to understand what was happening. But his feet felt nailed to the floor. How could he explain to Celeste on their wedding day that he might have a 7-year-old daughter with his ex-fiancée? How could he justify the fact that he had invited that same ex-fiancée to his wedding without telling her? He was trapped in a snare he had created himself, and the consequences of his actions suddenly loomed over him with brutal clarity. "Alejandro, who is that woman looking at you like that?" Celeste's voice brought him back to reality. His new wife was by his side, her sharp gaze fixed on Emilia and the girl. There was a trace of jealousy in her voice that she tried to disguise with social politeness, but Alejandro knew her well enough to detect the signs of her impending discontent. "An old acquaintance," he replied evasively, struggling to maintain a neutral tone. "I didn't think she would come." Celeste raised a perfectly outlined eyebrow. Her feminine intuition told her that this old acquaintance was much more than he was willing to admit. "And the girl looks astonishingly like you, don't you think?" Alejandro felt a bead of sweat form on his forehead. His wife was far from naive, and he knew he couldn't hide the truth for long. Before he could answer, Emilia approached them, still holding her daughter's hand. Each of her steps resonated in Alejandro's mind, like the tolling of a gong, announcing the inevitable confrontation he feared so much. The guests around them began to notice the palpable tension, and conversations hushed. Glances became more curious. "Hello, Alejandro," Emilia said, her voice steady as she reached them. "Congratulations on your wedding." Her tone was polite but distant, the kind used with a perfect stranger. Only the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her emotion. Alejandro opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. He was mesmerized by this woman he once loved more than anything in the world, who now presented herself before him with his daughter, suddenly turning his existence upside down. "Hello," he managed to say finally. "I'm glad you could make it." It was a lie. He wasn't glad. He was terrified, confused, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions he couldn't unravel. Celeste stepped closer, her arm sliding possessively around him, marking her territory with the subtlety of a lioness protecting her cub. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand toward Emilia. "I am Celeste Velasco, Alejandro's wife." The emphasis she put on the word wife left no doubt about her intentions. Emilia politely shook the extended hand, her smile not wavering for a second. "Emilia Dominguez. It is a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Velasco. Allow me to introduce my daughter, Clara." The girl curtsied perfectly, as she had undoubtedly been taught, and gave Celeste a radiant smile. "Hello, ma'am. Mommy said you were very pretty, and it's true." The girl's innocence contrasted cruelly with the electric tension between the adults. Celeste couldn't help but smile, moved by the child's spontaneity. But Alejandro saw that her eyes remained wary. "How old are you, Clara?" Celeste asked with forced sweetness. "I'm 7.5, ma'am. I'll turn 8 in December." Alejandro closed his eyes for a second. December. Exactly 9 months after that last night they had spent together. That last night of love before they separated forever. The math was relentless, and there was no longer any possible doubt about the girl's paternity. The silence that followed was deafening. Celeste, who was no fool, was visibly starting to piece the puzzle together. Her gaze moved from Alejandro to Emilia, then from Emilia to Clara, and he could almost see the gears in her mind turning at full speed. When she finally looked at her husband, there was a cold glint in her eyes he had never seen before. "Alejandro, could you give me a moment alone?" she asked in a dangerously calm voice. It wasn't really a question, but a barely veiled order, and they both knew it. Alejandro nodded, unable to refuse, even though he knew this conversation would likely be one of the most difficult of his life. "Emilia, if you'll excuse us for a few minutes," he said, turning to his ex-fiancée. "Perhaps we can talk later." Emilia nodded, perfectly understanding the delicate situation she had put them in with her mere presence. "Of course. Clara and I will go see the gardens in the meantime. They are magnificent." She took her daughter's hand and walked away gracefully, leaving behind a trail of perfume that instantly transported Alejandro 8 years back. Celeste waited until they were out of earshot before turning to her husband, her mask of social grace dropping instantly. "Don't tell me you didn't know," she hissed through clenched teeth, her blue eyes flashing. "That girl is your spitting image, Alejandro. How could you hide something like this from me on our wedding day?" Her voice was low but vibrating with anger, and Alejandro realized he had never seen his wife in such a state. "Honestly, I didn't know, Celeste," he replied, his voice choked. "I swear to you, I didn't know. If I had known Emilia was pregnant—" He fell silent, unable to say what he would have done in that case. Would he have married Emilia? Would he have given up Celeste? These questions tortured him, but it was too late to answer them. "Why did you invite her?" Celeste asked, her voice cracking slightly. "Why did you invite your ex-fiancé to our wedding without even telling me? Was it your intention to humiliate me in front of all society?" Tears gathered in her eyes, and Alejandro's heart sank. Whatever the complexity of his feelings, Celeste didn't deserve this. She was a good woman, generous and affectionate, and didn't deserve to suffer for his past mistakes. "It wasn't my intention," he said, trying to take her hands, but she pulled away abruptly. I don't know what I wanted, Celeste. Maybe to prove to myself that I had gotten over her. Maybe to have a conversation with her, to finally close that chapter of my life. I had no idea she would come with your daughter," Celeste finished bitterly. "Your daughter, whose existence you didn't know about until today. How is that possible, Alejandro? How can a woman hide a child from a man for 7 years? Her question was fair, and Alejandro had been asking himself the same thing since he first saw Clara. Why hadn't Emilia said anything? What had driven her to raise her daughter alone for all these years? "I don't know," he admitted, "but I have every intention of finding out. Celeste, I know this is terrible for you, for us, but I can't act as if this child doesn't exist now that I know she's here. She is my daughter." The words tumbled out before he could stop them, and he immediately saw the effect they had on his wife. She paled, swayed slightly, and had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. "Your daughter," she repeated, as if the words were poison in her mouth. "We've been married for 3 hours, Alejandro, and you're already telling me you have a daughter with another woman. How do you expect me to react? How do you expect us to build our future together with this secret between us?" Her voice was now choked by sobs she desperately tried to suppress, conscious that all the guests might be watching them. Alejandro wanted to hug her, reassure her, promise her that nothing would change between them. But he knew it would be a lie. Everything had changed the moment he laid eyes on Clara. That girl was his flesh and blood, and he could never act as if she didn't exist. At the same time, he loved Celeste, or at least believed he loved her, and didn't want his marriage to end before it had begun. "We'll find a solution," he said finally, though he had no idea what it could be. "Let me talk to Emilia, understand why she did this, and then we'll see how to handle the situation." Celeste stared at him, her eyes scanning his face as if trying to read her future. "All right," she said finally. "But be clear on this, Alejandro. I won't share my husband with the ghost of his past. Whether that woman has your daughter or not, you will have to choose. It's her or me, but not both." With those words, she turned and walked back toward the guests, instantly putting her mask of a radiant newlywed back on. Alejandro watched her go, wondering if he had just lost his wife on his wedding day. He stood alone for a few minutes trying to recover and decide his next move. Around him, the party was in full swing. Guests laughed, drank champagne, and danced to the sound of the orchestra he had brought specially from the capital. No one seemed to have noticed the drama that had just unfolded, or at least they were pretending not to, in order to save appearances. In the world Alejandro moved in, scandals had to be kept secret, emotions contained, and facades maintained at all costs. Finally, he headed toward the gardens, his heart beating faster with each step that brought him closer to Emilia and Clara. He found them by the lily pond, the girl happily counting goldfish, while her mother looked thoughtfully at the water shimmering under the sunset sun. Emilia didn't turn around when he approached, but he saw her shoulders tense slightly, betraying she was aware of his presence. "Hi, Daddy!" Clara exclaimed happily when she saw him. And those two simple words hit Alejandro's heart like a bomb. Daddy! His own daughter was calling him Dad, even though they had just met for the first time. How was that possible? What exactly had Amelia told her about him? Hi, Clara, he replied softly, crouching down to her level. Up close, the resemblance was even more astounding. This girl was a perfect mix of him and Amelia, with her chestnut hair with reddish highlights, her gray eyes with green specks, and her mischievous smile that reminded him so much of his own childhood. You look very pretty in your blue dress. Clara smiled radiantly at the compliment and twirled her dress flirtatiously. Mommy bought it especially to come see you. She said it was a very important day, and I had to look beautiful. Alejandro looked at Amelia, who had finally deigned to turn toward them. Her face was impassive, but there was a depth of emotion in her green eyes he couldn't decipher. Clara, would you like to go see the swans in the pond? Amelia asked gently. Just don't get too close to the edge, okay? The girl nodded enthusiastically and skipped away, leaving her parents face to face for the first time in 8 years. The silence that settled between them was heavy, with so many things unsaid, with silenced reproaches and unanswered questions. Alejandro didn't know where to start. Finally, he managed to utter a simple word that summarized all his questions. Why? Why didn't you tell me anything? Why did you raise our daughter alone? Why come today on my wedding day? Amelia understood the meaning of his question perfectly, and her face hardened slightly. Because you made it very clear to me that you never wanted to see me again, she replied in a calm voice, but full of reproach. Because you accused me of terrible things that night, Alejandro. Because you refused to listen to me when I tried to tell you the truth. So when I discovered I was pregnant, I preferred to raise our daughter far from you rather than risk her suffering your contempt. Alejandro felt a dagger twisting in his chest. That night, 8 years ago, returned to haunt him with painful precision. They had argued over a photo in a gossip magazine, a photo showing Amelia in the arms of another man at a charity gala. Alejandro, blinded by jealousy and pride, had refused to listen to her explanations, convinced she was cheating on him. They had made love one last time in a mix of passion and desperation. Then she had left the next morning without saying a word, taking with her all his hopes of happiness. You should have told me about Clara, he insisted. Whatever our differences were, I had a right to know I had a daughter. Amelia let out a bitter laugh that broke his heart. Oh, yes? And what would you have done, Alejandro? Would you have married me out of obligation? Would you have given up your precious career, your ambitions, your lifestyle to be a father with a woman you accused of infidelity? No, I don't think so. I preferred to let you live your life and build mine with our daughter. And what did you tell her about me? He asked, looking at Clara, who was now happily feeding the ducks with some breadcrumbs she had found. She called me Daddy, as if she had known me all her life. Amelia's gaze followed his, and her expression softened upon seeing her daughter. I told her the truth, Alejandro, that her dad was a very important, very busy man who couldn't live with us, but who loved her very much. I showed her your photos in the newspapers, told her about your business successes. I never wanted her to hate you or think you had abandoned her voluntarily. This revelation shocked Alejandro more than he expected. Despite their painful breakup, Amelia had preserved his image in his daughter's eyes. She had allowed her to grow up loving a father she had never met. Then why now? He asked. Why come today on my wedding day? What do you want from me, Amelia? There was a plea in his voice he didn't even try to hide. He needed to understand, to make sense of this situation that was turning everything he thought he knew about his life upside down. Amelia took a deep breath before answering, as if gathering the courage to say something difficult. Because Clara is sick, Alejandro. She needs a bone marrow transplant, and I'm not compatible. Her voice broke on the last words, and Alejandro saw tears gather in her green eyes. The doctors say her chances of finding a compatible donor increase significantly if a close relative can be tested. You are her last hope, Alejandro. The world crumbled around him. His daughter, this magnificent girl he had just discovered, was sick, potentially dying. And Amelia had come to see him not to turn his life upside down or to take revenge for old wounds, but to save her daughter. Suddenly, everything made different sense. Her presence at the wedding, her determination despite the awkward situation, the courage she had to muster to come and ask him for help. What disease? He managed to articulate, his voice a whisper. Leukemia, Amelia replied, discreetly wiping her eyes. Diagnosed 6 months ago. She has responded well to chemotherapy, but the doctors say a transplant is necessary to ensure a complete cure. I have exhausted all donor banks in Mexico and Europe. You are her last hope, Alejandro. Alejandro felt his legs fail him and had to sit on the stone bench by the pond. His daughter was sick, gravely sick, and he hadn't even known. While he built his empire and planned the wedding of his dreams, his daughter was fighting cancer. Guilt washed over him like a wave, mixed with a terror he had never felt before. He was a man used to controlling every aspect of his life. But here, faced with this revelation, he felt completely helpless. Since when have you known? He asked, his voice hoarse. Amelia sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough for him to smell the familiar scent of her skin. The diagnosis was last October. At first, I hoped a compatible donor would appear, but as the months passed, she shrugged with a resignation that broke his heart. The doctors insisted I contact the biological father. I resisted as long as I could, Alejandro, but I can't let our daughter die out of pride. The word die echoed in Alejandro's mind like a funeral bell. He looked at Clara, who was laughing as a swan approached the edge of the pond, so full of life and carefree that it was impossible to imagine she was sick. She doesn't know how serious it is, does she? Amelia shook her head. I told her she was a little sick and had to take medicine to get better, but she doesn't know all the details. She has suffered enough with the chemotherapy. I'll get tested, Alejandro said, without a second's hesitation. Tomorrow morning. No, tonight if necessary. Who do I contact? For the first time since she arrived, Amelia smiled. A genuine smile that lit up her face and reminded Alejandro why he had fallen in love with her so many years ago. Thank you, she whispered. I knew that despite everything that happened between us, you couldn't refuse to help Clara. She is my daughter, he replied simply. And those 3 words contained all the determination in the world. Even though I just met her, she is my daughter, and I will do everything in my power to save her. He turned to Amelia. Their gazes met for the first time since they had started talking. Why did you wait until today? You could have come sooner, explained the situation. Amelia looked away, ashamed. I tried to contact you several times. I called your office, but your assistant always said you were in a meeting or traveling. I wrote letters I never sent, and then I saw your wedding announcement in the newspapers, and thought if you invited me, maybe it would be a sign you were willing to listen to me. She let out a small, nervous laugh. I never expected you to actually do it. Me neither, Alejandro admitted. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe to prove to myself I was over you, or maybe... He didn't finish his sentence, unable to confess that perhaps deep down he had hoped to see her again. In any case, I'm glad you came, even if the circumstances are... He searched for the words. Complicated. Clara ran back toward them, her cheeks flushed from the fresh evening air. Mommy, Daddy, did you see the swans? They're magnificent, and there are babies too. The girl's enthusiasm was contagious. And despite the seriousness of the situation, Alejandro couldn't help but smile. This girl was a ray of sunshine, and the idea that she could be in danger filled him with a fierce need to protect her. "Yes, honey, we saw them," Amelia replied, stroking her daughter's hair. "Clara, would you like to spend some time with Daddy? Maybe you two could get to know each other." Clara nodded vigorously, her eyes shining with excitement. "Oh, yes. Can you tell me about your work, Daddy? Mommy says you build very important things." Alejandro's heart ached. This girl looked at him with such unconditional love and admiration that it moved him to the core. How could he have missed all this? How could he have lived 7 years without knowing of the existence of this wonderful being? His own flesh and blood. "Sure, little one," he replied, kneeling in front of her. "But first, you tell me what you like to do. What are your favorite games? What is your favorite color?" Clara began to chatter enthusiastically, telling him she loved drawing, took piano lessons, liked stories about princesses, but also pirates, and that her favorite color was violet, like her doll's eyes. While listening to his daughter, Alejandro felt a presence behind him. He turned and saw Felipe approaching with his usual grave expression. "Sir, excuse the interruption, but Mrs. Velasco is looking for you. The guests are starting to wonder about your absence." The brutal return to reality hit Alejandro like a slap. His wedding, Celeste, his guests, his new life waiting for him at the hacienda. How was he going to reconcile all this with this discovery that changed everything? "I'll be there in a few minutes, Felipe," he replied. His assistant nodded and walked away discreetly. But Alejandro saw he had noticed the astounding resemblance between him and Clara. Felipe was a smart and discreet man who had handled many delicate situations for his boss over the years, but this surpassed anything they had encountered before. "I have to go back to my guests," he told Amelia as he stood up. "But we need to talk, really talk about Clara, about her treatment, about what we're going to do now." Amelia nodded, perfectly understanding the impossible situation he was in. "Of course, we can leave now if you prefer. I didn't want to interrupt your evening more than necessary." "No," Alejandro said more firmly than he intended. "No, don't leave yet. Clara, would you like to see the inside of the hacienda? There are very beautiful paintings and even a library with old books." The girl's eyes lit up. "Oh, yes. Are there history books?" "Many," Alejandro promised. "Felipe will give you a tour while I attend to my guests, and then we'll all have dinner together. Does that sound good?" Amelia seemed to hesitate. "Alejandro, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Your wife didn't look very happy to see us, Tajes, and I can understand that. After all, it's her wedding day." But Alejandro had made a decision. He had just discovered he had a daughter who was sick, and he wasn't going to let her go without having some time to get to know her better. "Celeste will understand," he said, hoping it was true. "Felipe, could you prepare 2 extra places for dinner and show Miss Clara the hacienda? She loves stories." His assistant nodded without asking questions, long accustomed to his boss's unexpected requests. "Of course, sir. Miss Clara, if you'll follow me." Clara confidently took Felipe's extended hand. Then she turned to Alejandro. "Will you come find us soon, Daddy?" That innocent question put a knot in his throat. "Yes, honey, very soon. In the meantime, behave well with Mr. Felipe." He watched his daughter walk away toward the hacienda, her small hand in his assistant's, and had the surreal impression of living a waking dream. "Alejandro," Amelia said softly when they were left alone, "I know this is a lot for you. If you need time to think, to process all this, I can understand. Clara and I can return to Mexico City and come back when you're ready to." "No," he interrupted her. "No, Amelia. I've already lost 7 years of my daughter's life. I don't want to lose another minute." He walked toward the hacienda with a determined step, Amelia by his side. It was time to face Celeste and his guests, to explain a situation he himself didn't fully understand yet. But one thing was certain. He would not deny his daughter, whatever the consequences for his marriage and his social life. The party was still in full swing when they reached the terrace. The orchestra was playing a Viennese waltz, and several couples were dancing under the lights that had begun to shine in the twilight. Alejandro looked for Celeste in the crowd and found her in animated conversation with her mother and some friends, a glass of champagne in hand. She looked at him when he approached, and he immediately saw she had been crying, despite her carefully retouched makeup. "Ladies, would you mind excusing us for a moment?" he asked politely. "I would like to speak alone with my wife." Celeste's friends exchanged knowing glances, but walked away tactfully, leaving the newlyweds face to face. Celeste drank her glass of champagne in one gulp before looking him straight in the eyes. "Well," she said simply, "what did she tell you to justify hiding the existence of your daughter from you for 7 years? Her voice was calm, too calm, and Alejandro recognized the signs of one of her cold rages, which was much more formidable than her outbursts. "She didn't hide her out of malice, Celeste," he said, choosing his words carefully, aware that everything he said could be used against him. "Our breakup was very ugly. I said terrible things. I refused to listen to her. When she discovered she was pregnant, she preferred to raise our daughter alone rather than risk me rejecting her." Celeste let out a humorless laugh. "How touching. And of course you forgive her. You forgive her for depriving you of your daughter, and for depriving your daughter of her father. But tell me, Alejandro, why did she come today? What does she want?" His wife's astuteness no longer surprised him. Celeste had always had an infallible instinct for guessing people's hidden motivations. "Clara is sick," he confessed. He immediately saw Celeste's expression change. "She has leukemia and needs a bone marrow transplant. Emilia is not compatible, and she is hoping I am." The silence that followed this revelation was heavy. Celeste stared at him, and he saw a succession of emotions pass over her face. Surprise, compassion, but also a painful resignation. "Your daughter is dying," she said finally. It wasn't a question, but a statement of facts. "And your ex-girlfriend came to ask you to save her on your wedding day to another woman." She shook her head, as if she couldn't believe the situation. "It sounds like the script of a bad melodrama. Celeste, I know this is incredibly difficult for you, for us, but this girl is my daughter." "Your daughter," she finished. "Yes, Alejandro, I understand. Your daughter, whom you didn't know an hour ago, and for whom you are now willing to turn our wedding upside down." There was a bitterness in her voice he had never heard before, and he realized he was losing his wife on the very day of their union. "That's not what I want," he protested. "I want our marriage to work, Celeste, but I can't ignore Clara's existence now that I know she's here, and I can't let her die if I have the power to save her." Celeste stared at him, and he saw tears shine in her blue eyes. "I know," she said softly, "and that is exactly why I am losing you, right? Because you are a good man, Alejandro, a man who could never abandon his daughter, not even one he doesn't know. And I am just a wife of a few hours who suddenly finds herself competing with a sick child and the love of your life." "Emilia is not the love of my life," Alejandro protested. But even to his own ears, his words sounded false. "You are the one I married, Celeste. You are the one I love." Celeste gave a sad smile that broke his heart. "Do you think you love me, Alejandro? But look at yourself since she arrived. Your eyes shine in a way I have never seen before. That woman and that girl have awakened something in you that I have never been able to touch." He wanted to protest, but deep down he knew she was right. Since he had seen Emilia and Clara, he had felt alive in a way he had forgotten, as if a part of him that had been dormant for 8 years had suddenly awakened. This didn't mean he didn't love Celeste, but he was forced to admit that his feelings had never had the same burning intensity he had known with Emilia. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, feeling helpless. "Tell me, what do you expect from me, Celeste? And I will do it." She looked at him with infinite sadness, and he understood she had made her decision. What I want is for you to get tested for your daughter. I want you to save her if you can, and I want you to be honest with yourself about what you really feel for her mother. And us? He asked, voice hoarse. What will happen to us? Celeste took his hands in hers, her fingers caressing the ring she had only worn for a few hours. I don't know, Alejandro. Maybe we'll get through this. Maybe you'll choose your new family. Or maybe we'll discover our marriage was a mistake from the beginning. He couldn't deny it. Maybe his marriage was indeed a mistake. Maybe he had married Celeste because she represented stability, respectability, everything a man of his position was supposed to desire instead of true love. This thought terrified him, but he could no longer ignore it. I don't want to lose you, he said sincerely. Celeste smiled through her tears. I don't want to lose you either, but I also don't want a husband who stays with me out of obligation or habit. If we are going to be together, Alejandro, it has to be because we truly love each other, not because we signed some papers this morning. The orchestra began a new melody, softer, more melancholic. Around them, the guests continued the party, oblivious to the drama unfolding between the newlyweds. Alejandro wanted to stop time, go back a few hours before Emilia and Clara burst into his life and turned everything upside down. But he knew it was impossible. He could no longer act as if his daughter didn't exist. Mr. Velasco, Philippe's voice startled him. His assistant was a few meters away, accompanied by Clara, who held a book in her hand, her eyes shining with excitement. Miss Clara wants to show you something she found in the library. Alejandro exchanged a look with Celeste, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Whatever happened between them, he couldn't make this innocent girl pay for the complications of their adult lives. What did you find, little one? Alejandro asked, kneeling in front of his daughter. Clara extended the book to him proudly. It's a very old storybook. Mr. Philippe says it's over 100 years old, and look, it has very pretty drawings. She opened the book to an illustrated page showing a princess in a castle, and Alejandro recognized one of the works from the Valdez family collection. It is very beautiful indeed, he said, admiring the delicate illustrations. Do you know how to read Old French? Clara shook her head sadly. No, the words are too difficult. But Mommy is teaching me modern French at home. She says it's important to know several languages. Alejandro glanced sideways at Celeste, who was observing the scene with an indecipherable expression. Hello, little one, Celeste said suddenly, approaching Clara. How was your tour of the hacienda? The girl looked at her with her big gray eyes, a little intimidated by the young woman's elegance. Very good, ma'am. Your house is very pretty. It's a real princess castle. Despite the tension of the situation, Celeste couldn't help but smile. Thank you, darling. And tell me, are you hungry? Dinner will be served soon. Alejandro was moved to see his wife making an effort to be kind to Clara, despite the circumstances. Whatever the outcome of their marital crisis, Celeste remained a classy woman who would never make a child pay for the mistakes of adults. Oh yes, I'm very hungry, Clara exclaimed. And Mommy too. She hasn't eaten anything since this morning. She was so nervous about coming to see you. This innocent revelation reminded Alejandro that Emilia was also having a very hard time in this situation. She must have gathered enormous courage to come see him on his wedding day, knowing she risked being poorly received, all in the hope of saving her daughter. He realized it hadn't even occurred to him to ask how she was, if she needed financial help for Clara's care, if she was facing this hard test alone. Where is Mommy, by the way? He asked Clara. She stayed in the library, the girl replied. She was looking at the books, but she looked sad. I think she was crying a little. This information squeezed Alejandro's heart. Emilia was crying alone in the library while he argued with his wife on the terrace. He had to go see her to make sure she was okay. Felipe, could you take Clara to the dining room And have them serve her something to snack on while they prepare dinner? He asked. I would like to speak with her mother. His assistant nodded and extended his hand to the girl. Come, Miss Clara. I think the chefs have prepared some delicious appetizers, and maybe even a hot chocolate if you behave. Clara clapped with excitement and followed Felipe without protest, taking her precious book with her. When she was out of earshot, Celeste turned to Alejandro. Go see her, she said simply. That poor woman must be very affected. I'll take care of our guests. Someone has to play host. There was a resignation in her voice that hurt Alejandro, but also a generosity that reminded him why he had wanted to marry her. Celeste, he began, but she interrupted him with a gesture. Go, Alejandro. We'll have a lifetime to talk about us. That woman and that girl need you now. She gave him a quick kiss on the cheek, a kiss as light as a feather, and then returned to her guests with her smiling facade perfectly in place. Alejandro headed toward the library with his heart pounding. He found Emilia standing in front of the large window, overlooking the gardens with her arms crossed over her chest, a defensive posture he knew well. She didn't turn when he entered, but he saw her shoulders tense slightly. Clara told me you were sad, he said softly. Are you okay? How can I be okay, Alejandro? She replied without turning. I just burst into your new life on your wedding day to tell you we have a daughter together and she's dying. Your wife hates me. Your guests look at me like an intruder. And you, she interrupted herself, her voice cracking slightly. And you look completely lost. He approached her slowly, as one would approach a wounded animal. I am lost, it's true, but not for the reasons you think. She finally turned, and he saw she had indeed been crying. Her green eyes were reddened, her makeup slightly smudged, despite her efforts to fix it. She was still beautiful, dazzlingly beautiful, and he felt the urge to hug her, to comfort her, like so many times in the past. I'm lost because everything I believed just crumbled in a few hours, he continued. I thought I had built a perfect, stable, predictable life, and suddenly you appear with our daughter, and everything I thought was important seems futile to me. My business, my marriage, my reputation, none of that matters in the face of the fact that Clara is sick. Emilia stared at him, trying to decipher his feelings. I'm sorry, Alejandro. I regret bursting into your life this way, for turning everything upside down. If I had had a choice, you did the right thing, he interrupted her. You did the right thing coming. I have a right to know my daughter, and she has a right to have a father, even if I find out 8 years too late. 8.5, Emilia corrected automatically, and they both smiled despite the seriousness of the situation. This small moment of lightness reminded him of the time when they were happy together, when they could laugh at anything, when the future seemed bright and full of promise. Tell me about her illness, he asked, sitting in one of the leather armchairs in the library. I want to know everything. Since when has she been sick? How did you find out? What are the treatments? The prognosis? Emilia sat across from him, and for the next half hour, she told him everything. The first symptoms she had attributed to school fatigue, the tests that had revealed the horrible truth, the nights spent in the hospital while Clara underwent chemotherapy, the terror of losing her that woke her up every night. Alejandro listened in silence, his heart aching for everything Emilia had had to endure alone. How had she found the strength to keep working, to smile at her daughter, to make her believe everything was going to be okay? He admired her strength, her determination, but was also consumed by guilt for not having been there to support them. Why didn't you contact me sooner? He asked when she had finished. Since the diagnosis, you should have called me, no matter what happened between us. It's about our daughter's life. I tried, Alejandro. I really tried. But every time I tried to call you, I remembered that night. Your accusations, the way you looked at me, telling me you never wanted to see me again. I was angry, he said weakly. I was jealous and proud, and I said things I really didn't mean. Emilia gave a bitter smile. You thought I was cheating on you with Marco Dubas. You refused to listen to my explanations. You accused me of being a liar and a manipulator. And when I tried to tell you that photo only showed a courtesy dance at a charity gala, you told me you didn't want to hear any more of my lies. Alejandro closed his eyes, remembering that terrible night when his jealousy had destroyed their love. He was furious when he discovered that photo of Emilia in the arms of Marco Dubas, a man he had hated since his college years and who was now his direct competitor in business. He didn't want to hear. It was a simple protocol dance that the photographer had captured the only moment they were together all night. His wounded pride and sick jealousy had triumphed over his reason. I discovered the truth a few months later, he confessed with a hoarse voice. Marco himself told me laughing that the photo had been taken at the moment protocol required him to dance with all the important women of the night. He thought it was funny that it might have caused problems between us. The memory of that late revelation still afflicted him. He had destroyed their love for nothing, out of pure stupidity and male pride. But you never contacted me to apologize, Emilia said in a soft voice, but full of reproach. You preferred to keep your pride rather than admit your mistakes. Alejandro opened his eyes and met her gaze. I tried, he said. God knows I tried, Emilia. But you had disappeared, moved, changed your number, left your job. No one knew where you had gone. I even hired a private detective to find you. But you seemed to have erased all trace of your existence. This revelation surprised Emilia. You tried to find me for months? I went crazy, Alejandro confirmed. I didn't sleep, didn't eat. I was obsessed with the idea of finding you to beg for forgiveness. My loved ones finally convinced me it was better to stop, turn the page, and rebuild my life. Just when I was giving up, you were discovering you were pregnant with my daughter. Emilia remained silent for a long moment, processing this information. I didn't know, she murmured finally. I thought you were relieved to see me go, that you had quickly found someone else. It took me 6 years to agree to date another woman, Emilia, Alejandro confessed. And even then, my relationship with Celeste is more a marriage of convenience than a great passion. My parents and hers had desired this union for a long time. Don't you love her? Emilia asked, and there was something in her voice he couldn't identify. Curiosity? Hope? I thought I loved her, he replied honestly. Or rather, I convinced myself that what I felt for her was love. Celeste is a wonderful woman, intelligent, elegant. She would be a perfect wife for any man, but, Emilia encouraged him. Alejandro looked her straight in the eyes before answering. But I don't feel the same passion for her that I felt for you. That is the truth. The silence that followed this confession was charged with electricity. Emilia had blushed and looked away, visibly moved by his words. Alejandro, she said finally, we can't go back. Too many things have happened. Too much water has passed under the bridge. You are married now. And she hesitated. I have learned to live without you. Is there someone in your life? He asked, fearing the answer. But he needed to know. Emilia shook her head. No. How could there be? Between work, Clara, and now her illness, I haven't had time or energy for romantic relationships. Besides, how do I explain to a man that my daughter is the daughter of one of Mexico's most coveted bachelors? Most would have run away. You should have told me about Clara since her birth, Alejandro insisted. No matter our personal problems, I had a right to know my daughter, and she had a right to know her father. You're right, Emilia admitted. I know that now, but at that moment I was young. I was hurt, terrified at the idea of raising a child alone. I was only 26, Alejandro. She took a deep breath. I made the decision that seemed best to me at that time. Before Alejandro could answer, the library door opened, and Clara ran in. followed by Felipe, who looked slightly out of breath. "Mommy, Daddy, you have to come see. There are musicians playing the harp, and Mrs. Velasco said I could ask them to play my favorite song." The girls' enthusiasm was contagious, and despite the seriousness of their conversation, Alejandro couldn't help but smile. "What is your favorite song, little one?" "La Vie en Rose," Clara exclaimed. "Mommy sings it every night before sleeping. It's our special song." Alejandro glanced sideways at Amelia, who had blushed. That song had also been theirs, the one they listened to hugging in their small apartment in the city when they were young and carefree. "It is a very beautiful song," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I am sure the musicians would be delighted to play it for you." He took Clara's hand in his, still marveling at the softness of that small hand, a perfect mix of his and Amelia's. "But first, how about you meet some of my friends? There are very interesting people here tonight." The three returned to the terrace, where the reception was in full swing. Alejandro proudly introduced Clara to some carefully selected guests, the ones he knew were discreet enough not to spread gossip all over Mexico the next day. The girl charmed everyone with her spontaneity and intelligence, asking pertinent questions to ambassadors about their countries, complimenting ladies on their dresses, and listening with fascination to stories told by captains of industry. Celeste watched the scene from afar, and Alejandro saw she was torn between admiration for this exceptional girl and the pain of seeing her husband so radiant with paternal pride for another woman's daughter. When their gazes met, she gave him a sad but sincere smile, and he understood she was doing everything possible to accept a situation that was completely out of her control. Dinner was served in the hacienda's grand dining room, a magnificent hall with its 17th century wood paneling and crystal chandeliers. Alejandro had Amelia and Clara sit at his table, despite the surprised looks of some guests wondering who these mysterious last-minute guests were. Celeste had insisted that Clara sit between her and Alejandro, and spent the night attending to the girl with a kindness that deeply moved Alejandro. "Mrs. Velasco," Clara said, savoring her dessert, "your castle is really magical. It's like in a history book. You must feel like a real princess here." Celeste smiled, the first genuine smile since Amelia had arrived. "Thank you, darling. And where do you live?" "With Mommy," Clara replied. "We have a small apartment in Mexico City. It's not as big as your castle, but Mommy says it's our cozy little nest, and we have a terrace with flowers." "That must be very nice," Celeste said politely. "And what do you like to do when you're not in school?" "I like to draw, play the piano, read stories, and I love cooking with Mommy. She teaches me to make cakes." Clara turned to Alejandro. "Daddy, do you know how to cook?" His daughter's innocent question made Alejandro smile. "Not very well, I'm afraid. I'm better at ordering in restaurants than making meals." "I could teach you," Clara offered enthusiastically. "Mommy says I'm good at making cookies. We could make cookies together." The idea of cooking with his daughter filled Alejandro with a joy he had never felt before. "That would be wonderful, little one. I would love to learn how to make cookies with you." The evening continued in a strange atmosphere, a mix of joy and tension. The guests had fun dancing and laughing, celebrating what was supposed to be one of the most beautiful days of Alejandro's life. But he couldn't help but think that this day, on the contrary, might mark the end of an era. Clara had fallen asleep on a sofa in the lounge, exhausted by all the emotions of the day, and Amelia watched over her tenderly. "She's adorable," Celeste said as she approached Amelia. The two women were alone for the first time that night, as Alejandro had gone to say goodbye to some departing guests. "You've done a wonderful job with her." Amelia looked at her rival, surprised by the sincerity of her tone. "Thank you," she said simply. "She is the light of my life." "It shows," Celeste replied. "She talks about you with so much love and admiration. You must be an extraordinary mother." An awkward silence settled between them, as neither knew how to address the situation they were in. It was Celeste who finally broke the silence. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Amelia nodded. "Are you still in love with him?" The direct question took Amelia by surprise. She didn't expect such frankness. She began. "It's complicated," she finally replied. "Alejandro and I shared something very strong in the past, but that is, in the past. I didn't come here to win anyone back, Mrs. Velasco. I came to save my daughter." "Our daughter," Celeste corrected softly. "Now she is his daughter, too." "Yes," Amelia admitted. "And I know that changes everything for you. I regret bursting into your life this way on your wedding day. If you had had a choice, you did the right thing," Celeste interrupted, repeating the words Alejandro had uttered earlier. "This girl needs her father, and he needs to know his daughter, even if it makes our lives terribly complicated." Amelia studied Celeste's face, trying to understand this woman who showed so much grace in the face of adversity. "Do you really love him?" she said. And it wasn't a question. Celeste gave a sad smile. "Yes, I love him, but I'm starting to realize that maybe he doesn't love me the same way. Or at least not the way he loves you." This confession moved Amelia, who hadn't imagined Alejandro's wife could be so lucid about the situation. "I don't want to ruin your marriage," she said sincerely. "I just want Clara to have a chance to survive. And if that means Alejandro has to be part of her life, so be it. But I'm not looking to resume my relationship with him. Too many things have changed." Celeste stared at her, trying to discern the sincerity of her words. "You really mean it?" "Yes," Amelia replied firmly. "I'm no longer the naive girl I was. I've learned to live alone, to be strong for my daughter. I no longer need to be saved." Alejandro chose that moment to return to them, and immediately sensed the tension between the two women. "Everything okay?" he asked, looking from his wife to his ex-fiancée. "Perfectly," Celeste replied, standing up. "Amelia and I were getting to know each other. You have a remarkable daughter, Alejandro. You can be proud." With those words, she walked away, leaving Alejandro perplexed by what had just happened. "What did you talk about?" he asked Amelia. "About Clara, about the situation, about what we're going to do now." Amelia tenderly stroked her sleeping daughter's hair. "Your wife is a good person, Alejandro. She doesn't deserve to suffer for our past mistakes." Alejandro sat beside her, contemplating Clara's serene face. "What are we going to do, Amelia? How are we going to handle all this?" "One step at a time," she replied pragmatically. "First, you do the compatibility test. Then we see if you can help Clara. And after that," she shrugged, "after that, we'll improvise. The important thing is that she gets well. The rest we'll solve later." Alejandro nodded, admiring once again Amelia's strength and pragmatism. She had always had that ability to focus on the essentials when the situation became critical. "I'll call my doctor tomorrow morning," he promised. "No, I'll call him tonight. I want this test done as soon as possible." "Alejandro," Amelia said softly, "you need to know one thing. Even if you are compatible, there is no guarantee the transplant will work. Doctors speak of a 70% chance of success in the best case. And even if everything goes well, Clara will need months of rehabilitation, medical follow-up." "I know you will, but I know," he said, "and I'll be there for everything. I will never let my daughter face anything alone again." The determination in his voice was absolute, and Amelia felt tears gathering in her eyes. Finally, after so many years, Clara was going to have a father present in her life. Whatever happened between Alejandro and her daughter would no longer be alone. The last guests left around 1 a.m., leaving the hacienda in relative silence. Felipe had prepared a suite for Amelia and Clara, understanding their presence would be necessary in the coming days. Clara was still sleeping deeply, exhausted by all the emotions of the day, and Alejandro carried her himself to her room, moved to finally hold his daughter in his arms. "She's so light," he whispered to Amelia, as he laid her gently on the bed. Is that normal? Has she lost weight because of the illness? A little, Amelia admitted as she tucked her daughter in tenderly. But she's better now. Chemotherapy weakened her a lot, but since she's in remission, she's regaining strength. Alejandro observed Clara's sleeping face, noting the pallor of her complexion and the slight circles under her eyes. His daughter was sick, really sick, and he hadn't been there to support her. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry for not being there, Amelia. For her birth, her first steps, her first words, her first day of school, and now for her illness. What kind of father am I?" Amelia placed a comforting hand on his arm. "It's not your fault, Alejandro. You didn't know she existed. And now that you know, you're here. That's what matters." They stood in silence for a moment, watching Clara sleep, united in their love for this girl they had created together, and whom life had separated them from. "She looks like you when she sleeps," Amelia whispered. "She has your serious expression, as if she were thinking about important things even while dreaming." Alejandro smiled, moved by the observation. "And she has your determination. Tonight, when she wanted to feed the ducks at all costs, she reminded me of you when you got an idea in your head. I hope she also has your strength to face what's coming," Amelia said with emotion. "She's going to need all our courage." "She will have it," Alejandro promised. "We will be strong for her, both of us." The word both resonated between them like a promise and a question at once. Were they really capable of being a team for their daughter after everything that had passed between them? They tiptoed out of the room, leaving the door ajar so they could hear Clara if she woke up. In the dimly lit hallway of the hacienda, they stood face to face, suddenly aware they were alone for the first time in hours. The atmosphere between them was charged with conflicting emotions, regret for the past, hope for the future, a mutual attraction they no longer dared to confess. "I should go to bed," Amelia said, breaking the silence that was becoming uncomfortable. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Alejandro nodded but made no move to leave. "Amelia," he said suddenly, "I know we can't erase the past, but I wish we could be friends. For Clara's sake, but also for us. I've missed you a lot." This confession moved Alejandro more than he wanted to admit. "I've missed you too," she admitted. "More than I would have liked. But Alejandro, you're married now. We have to be very careful with our feelings. Clara needs us to be balanced, not creating more complications." "I know," he said. "You're right. But knowing you don't hate me, that maybe we could be friends again, that gives me hope." "Good night, Alejandro," Amelia said softly, walking toward her room. "Good night, Amelia," he replied. "Watch Antoine." When she disappeared into her room, he stood still for a moment, his heart pounding. His life had just been completely turned upside down, and he still didn't know where he was heading. But one thing was certain: he would never give up on his daughter, whatever the consequences. Finally, he headed to his own room, where Celeste was waiting for him. She was sitting in front of her vanity, slowly and meticulously removing her makeup. Their gazes met in the mirror, and Alejandro saw all the fatigue and sadness his wife had hidden behind her smiling facade all night. "How is she?" Celeste asked without turning. "She's asleep. She's exhausted from all her emotions." Alejandro approached her hesitantly. "Celeste, I know this day has been terrible for you. I know none of this was planned." "And don't apologize," she interrupted him. "It's not your fault. This situation is too much for all of us." She finally turned to him, and he saw she had been crying. "Just tell me one thing, Alejandro. Are you happy to have discovered the existence of your daughter?" The question was tricky, but Alejandro decided to be honest. "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "Despite the circumstances, despite the complexity of the situation. Yes, I am happy to know Clara exists. She is extraordinary, Celeste. Intelligent, funny, endearing, curious about everything. In just a few hours, she has completely captured my heart. I am willing to do anything to save her, even give my own life if necessary." Celeste nodded, as if this answer confirmed what she already knew. "And what do you feel seeing her again?" The question was even harder, and Alejandro took time to reflect before answering. "I feel many things," he said finally. "Guilt for the way we broke up. Admiration for the strength she has shown in raising Clara alone. Gratitude for coming to find me despite everything that happened between us." "And love?" Celeste insisted. "Do you still feel love for her?" Alejandro closed his eyes, unable to hold his wife's gaze. "I don't know," he confessed. "I thought I was over her, but seeing her again today has awakened things I thought were buried. But Celeste, that doesn't change my feelings for you. You are my wife, and I want our marriage to work. Even if she were free, even if she loved you." Celeste's voice was now heavy with pain, and Alejandro realized his wife was suffering more than she wanted to show. "Celeste, please, don't ask me to answer hypothetical questions. The reality is that you are my wife. Emilia has her own life, and we all have to learn to coexist for Clara's sake." "You're not answering my question," Celeste insisted. "Because you already know the answer, don't you? If that woman extended her hand to you, you would take it without hesitation. You would give up me, our marriage, everything we've built together." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Alejandro's heart sank. He didn't want to hurt Celeste, but he couldn't lie to her either. "I don't know what I would do," he said truthfully. "This is all too new, too overwhelming. I need time to understand what I feel, to clarify my feelings. But Celeste, I promise you one thing. I will be honest with you if my feelings change. If I realize I can't be the husband you deserve, I'll tell you. You don't deserve to be lied to or for someone to stay with you out of pity." She stared at him, and he saw a succession of emotions pass through her eyes. Pain, anger, resignation, but also a form of respect for his honesty. "That's all I can ask," she said finally. "Honesty, even if the truth hurts." She got up and went to bed, her slow and tired movements betraying the emotional exhaustion of the day. "Where are you going to sleep?" she asked, seeing Alejandro not moving. "In my study," he replied. "I think we both need space to think." Celeste nodded, grateful he wasn't pretending everything was fine between them. "Good night, Alejandro," she said, as she slid under the sheets. "Good night, Celeste, and thank you." "Thank you? Why?" "For being so kind to Clara. Tonight you could have been cold, hostile, but you were wonderful with her. That means a lot to me." Celeste gave a sad smile. She's not to blame for all this mess. And besides, how could anyone not love her? With those words, she turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness. Alejandro stood still for a moment, then quietly left the room. He went to his study, a room he had set up in a tower of the hacienda that served as a refuge when he needed to think. The walls were lined with books, and a large window overlooked the moonlit gardens. Alejandro sat in his leather armchair and looked out into the night, trying to take stock of this day that had changed everything. He was a father. This thought filled him with a joy he had never felt before, mixed with panic at the idea that his daughter was sick. Clara was everything he had ever dreamed of in a daughter: intelligent, funny, endearing, curious about everything. In just a few hours, she had completely captured his heart. He was willing to do anything to save her, even give his own life if necessary. And Emilia. Seeing Emilia again had been like a punch to the stomach. All the emotions he thought he had overcome had returned with force. Love, desire, regret, guilt. She was even more beautiful than before, but above all, she had acquired a strength and maturity that made her even more captivating. The way she had raised her daughter alone, the way she faced illness with courage, the way she had come to find him despite their painful past. All of that inspired admiration in him, and Celeste, his poor wife, who found herself trapped in a storm she hadn't seen coming. Alejandro loved her sincerely, but he was starting to realize his love was perhaps more affection and mutual respect than true passion. Celeste deserved better than a husband who dreamed of another woman. But how to tell her the day after their wedding? This captivating story is far from over. If you want to know what happens next, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more. What do you think of the dilemmas Alejandro faces? How do you see the continuation of this complex story between past love, present obligations, and hope for the future? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinions are of utmost importance for the continuation of this emotional saga.